Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 449. All right, guys, welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise awareness of trauma and to support new trauma therapists just starting out on their trauma-informed journey. I do that through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. If you're a therapist of any kind, interested in learning about trauma, and you're looking for support and inspiration, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, let's get started. Several years ago when I was in graduate school and just starting seeing clients, I was doing a lot of commuting, like an hour and a half each way to my site. I was always thinking about my clients. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Why didn't I do that? Why I should have done that? And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be awesome if I had a seasoned master trauma therapist sitting right there beside me in the passenger seat? Well, obviously that didn't happen. So I created the program, and it's Trauma Therapist 2.0. It's my online community specifically dedicated for new trauma workers. If that's you, if you're just starting out on this trauma-informed journey, you're passionate about this work, and you're looking to gain confidence, you're looking to share your journey, share your challenges, and share your wins, to get inspiration, also to help to inspire others, I want to invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very honored to have back today Eduardo Duran. Eduardo, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. So Dr. Duran was born in northern New Mexico, and at age 14, his family relocated to California. He worked in the fields as a migrant farm worker, and at age 17, enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where he served for 6 years on board submarines and other vessels during the Vietnam War. Once he was discharged, he became interested in psychology and began his studies. At the same time, began working for the Navy as an engineering psychologist. Dr. Duran has been working as a clinical psychologist for over 2 decades. Much of his clinical work has concentrated on working with the legacy of historical trauma, which is the trauma that occurs in families and is then passed on to the following generation unless that trauma or soul wounding is dealt with. Through that process, Dr. Duran has learned that wounding of the spirit has been endured by most people in the world, and the lessons learned from this work is relevant to most people presenting with therapeutic issues. Dr. Duran has served as a professor of psychology in several graduate settings and continues to teach and lecture in community settings all over the world. One of his books, Healing the Soul Wound, is now out just recently in its second edition. And Dr. Duran, I just wanted to bring you back. You're one of those people who your episode has resonated. Past episode when you were on has resonated with myself and with a lot of other listeners for a lot of reasons. But anyway, welcome back.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, and honored to be of some help.
All right. So give us a quick, before we get started here, I know I said in the bio that you're originally from California, but where are you located now?
I'm actually in Bozeman, Montana. There's a lot of snow on the ground right now, and it's very cold. Yes.
Okay. So recently, when I asked you back on, you sent me a chapter of the forthcoming, or the second edition of Healing the Soul Wound, correct? It's called All Conditions Normal.
Yes.
And reading through it, one of the things that strikes me is this glaring disconnect between how we perceive war now, the ideas that individuals are going to war now, compared to how war was perceived and probably still is perceived in the indigenous and native cultures, and the harm, in a sense, the soul wounding that results from that. Let's get into this.
Yeah, and one of the things that struck me early on is that all of life is ceremony, and including ceremony of war, which I bring up that term in the chapter, which to a lot of people that's kind of a foreign idea. But I was talking to another veteran recently who was doing a podcast, and his job was the choir. He led the choir for the 101st Airborne, and he said it really struck him when he read that, because part of his job is to sing for funerals. And he says the whole thing is a ceremony. The gun salute, everything is ceremony.
Mm.
And when you say for indigenous people, actually the ceremony is for all people, except I think in the Western psyche, it has regressed back into the unconscious. So that the ceremony of war is still known, except it's in the unconscious. And as Jung says, anything that's in the unconscious then takes on a shadow form. So I think that psychologically, it's really important to become aware of what's going on. And so that way it's made conscious, and then the ceremony can take a different form, because as you know, presently the ceremony of war is all about destruction, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so that was some of my initial thinking on dealing with this from a ceremonial aspect, because it is ceremony. And even to the gun salute, and I was thinking about this, especially when President Bush's funeral happened. And for those who watched it on television, it was all ceremony, very somber. Everything moved in slow motion. There was the huge gun salute. And what is that about? I said, well, that's about basically thunder going into the spirit world, announcing the arrival of another warrior, and except that is repressed in the unconscious. And when we see it that way, it's like, oh my gosh, there's a reason why they do that. Why are they shooting all these guns at this funeral? And most of the time that's where it stops. People say, I guess that's just what they do. But it stays unconscious and repressed. And my task and my hope is to try to bring consciousness to this whole thing that has to do with war, and of course healing from war. And of course we'll probably talk about the suicide rates and all that later on in the discussion, but it's all connected as far as I see.
One of the things that I guess I'm having a difficulty understanding is the way Western culture perceives war, like you said, is very destructive. And it almost seems like our warriors have need that to do the work they do, i.e. killing.
Right.
And certainly this idea of ceremony and ritual, I guess ritual to a lesser degree, but ceremony is, from my knowledge, like you said, we see that when people come home, when people die, right? But how do we bring that or imbue that, and can we, in Western culture? And we talked a little bit about why that is important, but how do you do that? Is that possible now?
I believe it is. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here with you. And I have to have some optimism, because if we don't, the level of the war ceremony, the level it's taking now with nuclear weapons and all that, well, that'll be the final ceremony if that happens. So we really need to get a hold of this idea spiritually in the psyche. And by me writing this thing and getting it out into the world, I don't know, maybe a 5-star general or some president or some whoever in power will read it and say, wait a minute, we need to think about this. And it's interesting that in the military, there's chaplains and they preside over all these things. But even as spiritual leaders, it seems that idea has escaped them also. And here they're supposed to be the holy men and women that are presiding over this whole ceremony of war. But I think they've also lost the idea of what this actually means, and that they're presiding over life and death and all that goes with it. And so my intent is to bring a little glimmer of consciousness to this whole thing. And, to use a quote from Rumi, is if there's a crack in the psyche, it's through that crack that the light comes in. And if we don't create that crack, then we're not going to be here much longer, because from what I read, I just read in the news recently, the Russians launched another ballistic missile 5,000 miles from where they shot it from under the water, and that's capable, I think, of carrying 16 nuclear weapons. And so that one missile could destroy the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it's on a hair trigger right now. And so that's why I'm grateful that you're doing this, because in our belief, in a native way, is that when we put words out into this air, this exact same air is all over the world, and this air has a life to it. So now this air goes everywhere. And the words that we're saying right now, the air will remember when the air goes to Afghanistan, to Russia, wherever. And so it has a lot of power by us just being able to say the words. And then, of course, printing the words and getting them out there is also useful. And so that's kind of my thinking from what my teachers have taught me on the indigenous side of psychology.
There's seems to me to be a distinct crack, as you've called it, in the acknowledgement of war, right? I mean, civilians like to think that war's over there. We appreciate the warriors. Most of us do their job. Thank God they're doing their job.
Yeah.
But for me to think that we can imbue, or the warrior culture can imbue their culture with this consciousness, with this ceremony, to me, that feels like a real stretch. What kind of resistance do you see yourself coming up against as you propose these ideas, which, of course, are nothing new, correct?
Oh, no, not in the
right.
indigenous psyche. These are very ancient knowings. And the resistance I get usually from most of the work that I've done usually comes from Western medicine, Western psychology. But also, to my surprise, recently there's been some acceptance. I mean, the fact that this book is getting published by a mainstream, if you call it, publisher, tells me that there's an opening here. And then it'll be selling also as a textbook. So there'll be countless counselors, social workers, people that'll read it, that'll be going up the ranks. And somewhere in their life, they'll be using it. And then what gives me the faith that this is real is when I talk to actual veterans in a therapeutic setting, whether they're native or not, and I talk about these ideas, they just really stop. And I remember recently one of them just told me he had just gotten back from Afghanistan. He says, "How do you know this?" And I says, "Why?" He says, "Because what you're saying is real." Except, as a person just out of the military, he thought that what he was thinking was insane. So he couldn't talk about it until he heard it validated by someone like me, an authority, a psychologist, and all that. And also,
what was he thinking?
He was thinking that there is a spirit to war. And he also said that he believes that wherever he was at, that there were spiritual leaders on that side also doing spiritual ceremonies to affect the ceremony of war that was going on. And when I heard that, I was pretty amazed, because he's not really religious, spiritual, but he knew at a very deep level that there was something else going on besides soldiers on either side or bullets flying. There's a spiritual component to it. And so that's what gives me also the faith and the hope that the rank and file really, really understands this. And they're the ones also that are going to raise consciousness, because if enough people realize that this is what's going on, then usually there's a critical mass that can flip the whole thing over. And I'm really hoping that people on the other side of the world, like the Taliban or whoever, maybe they'll read All Conditions Normal, and I wonder what they would think. I mean, I would really like to talk to one of them after they read it. Hey, what do you think? You know?
Mm-hmm. Let's dial in, and because in this particular chapter, again, that's titled All Conditions Normal, and I'm going to have this linked up, if that's okay. Can I link this up on the okay, I'll have it linked up on the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. And just again, quickly, I'm speaking with Dr. Eduardo Duran. If let's dial in a little bit, because in this chapter you talk about specifically what is going on, and you reference the suicides. What is going on when people come back from war, and there's this rupture, this disconnect with individuals who don't embody the ceremony relative to those who do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And that's where the symptoms come from. And because I believe, and I think all the way back to Freud believes, that anxiety and those type of symptoms are basically the psyche wanting to deal with some kind of trauma. I mean, and he was the original trauma therapist, with his theories. And so when that comes up, if we don't deal with it from a spiritual perspective also, then only half of the problem can be solved through conventional psychotherapy, which is a good thing. There's medication, there's all of that. But also, I need to say, that the case study in the chapter also has to do with my own therapy. And that's why I kind of realized some of the things that I realized, that after years of being in therapy with a VA therapist and so on, I started getting insights into how trauma, the PTSD, if you will, or injury where blood doesn't flow, is so closely related to moral injury. And I make the case in the chapter that as the trauma becomes resolved, then that creates a space that is fed by the moral injury. So now the trauma kicks in again, and now the moral injury leaves a space, and so it creates a feedback loop: moral injury to trauma, trauma to moral injury, and that's what creates the hopelessness in the veteran, because after they deal with their PTSD and then it reemerges after several times, they feel this is not going to work because it just doesn't go away, and I've done everything I'm supposed to do to take care of this. And so it's the moral injury then that needs to be resolved also along with the trauma. And if we can do that, and that's not an easy lift, that the moral injury has to
Can you just, let me interject here. Can you define moral injury for our listeners? All right, guys, I want to welcome back Talkspace as a sponsor to this podcast. When you're busy, like we all are, the first thing that falls to the bottom of the list usually tends to be taking care of yourself. I don't have time or money for that, people often tend to say. Many people think that therapy is just about analyzing dreams or digging into painful memories, both of which can be very powerful. We know that. But it's also a great tool for developing coping skills, dealing with stress, and getting the accountability you need to achieve your goals. The bottom line is that life can be hard, and Talkspace wants to make sure more of us get the support we need at a price we can afford. As a listener of this podcast, you get $100 off your first month on Talkspace. To match with your perfect therapist, go to Talkspace.com or download the app. Make sure to use the code TRAUMATHERAPIST to get $100 off your first month and show your support for this show. Once again, go to Talkspace.com and use the code TRAUMATHERAPIST.
Okay, the moral injury, that's a new term, but the old term that I use, I say this is a soul guilt. Because as human beings, when we do something that goes against natural law, it creates a guilt, and it's a very deep guilt of the soul. And of course, the VA recently is catching up to that, and they've termed it a moral injury because it goes against moral fabric, spiritual morality. And whether you're right or wrong or indifferent in the war ceremony, it really doesn't matter. Even if you're, taking life or destroying things for the right cause, the natural law says that still has to be balanced, even if you're completely correct politically and with God and all of that. And if it's not, then that creates an emptiness that the moral injury keeps giving symptoms so that we can go back and deal with that. And one of the examples I can give you is there was a native veteran, Vietnam veteran, that went to his spiritual leaders after trying to heal himself. And basically they told him that he needed to go back somewhere and repay for whatever he had done, because my first law of the universe is that there's no free lunch. For everything we do, the universe will balance it out. And it's not that it's bad or good or anything like that. It has to do with just balancing things. And so he went back to the village in Vietnam, and he took his ceremonial altar, and he offered that altar and prayed with some of the elders, and they offered forgiveness. And then he was able to forgive himself. And then he was able to make himself whole, to deal with whatever had been going on for a lot of years around that. And there's other examples that veterans will go and do something in the community on behalf of whatever the ceremony they were involved in. And so then that brings closure and balances out the spiritual equation that needs to be balanced. Because all the psychotherapy in the world, it's really good. And I'm glad we have it. I'm glad I had quite a bit of it. But it also in my work as a therapist, and realizing that there's another piece that needs to be put in here in order to complete it, so then the person can be in balance. And that's why I used in the paper, I used Psalm 23, where one of the lines in there is, "He restores my soul." And when I read that, after many times in my life having heard that in movies and such, I realized he's talking about restoring his soul. He's the warrior king, and he had been in a lot of battles. So he knew part of his soul was missing. It was out there floating around somewhere in the war zone. And that's what happens to a lot of our warriors who don't restore their soul. They're still in Afghanistan, they're still in Iraq. And then when that happens, the identity is not intact. And it's real easy to kill yourself if there's nobody there to kill. If there's no identity, then the act of suicide really is very easy, because nothing is really happening.
So this idea of kind of giving back, in a sense of finding closure in that almost spiritual sense, is that what you're talking about in terms of understanding and embodying the ceremony of war?
Yeah, and the ceremony needs to be completed. See, because in a lot of the indigenous cultures from here, Africa, wherever, there's always a ceremony before war and also after the return, so that the soul would be replaced, if that was lost. But in a lot of the indigenous cultures, war wasn't about going out and killing people. The highest honor a warrior could have was to be able to touch the enemy, with their bare hand. So it was basically about making relationship. And there's actually a ceremony that is still practiced. It's called the killing of the enemy. But that ceremony is misunderstood, because in killing of the enemy, it doesn't mean killing the human being. It means killing whatever we perceive as the enemy. And when we kill that, then we make a relative of that person. So he or she becomes my brother or sister after we do the killing of the enemy ceremony, which is a very different thing, because now we're related, and we're even closer than flesh and blood to that human being, because we've been brought together spiritually.
There's something very evolved about that is very distant from the way that I think war is perceived right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and imagine if I were to go to Afghanistan and talk to their spiritual leader, and I say, I want to have this killing of the enemy ceremony the old way, but at the end, then we're going to become brothers. That would take a whole different toll on everything. And I believe that, because there's a lot of tribal people on that side of the world, I think that that's a possibility, because I got to think that in their traditions, such a ceremony exists also, because, still very tribal. And, and that's where I think a lot of times our military, I just found out that there's a branch of the military called psyops, where psychological warfare, but again, it's all negative, and it's winning the hearts and minds. But winning hearts and minds to me would mean doing it in a tribal sense of killing of the enemy ceremony, where now you become my relative. And how cool would that be? I mean, I know it might not happen in my lifetime, but who knows? I mean, stranger things have happened.
When you hear of all the suicides going on daily, what is it, 10, 20 now, whatever it is?
True. And actually, in the time that we're talking here, in the next 65 minutes, somebody will kill themselves.
I mean, just crazy. How do you come to terms with that? What do you, within the context of what we're speaking about now? Obviously, people have different reasons and so forth, but what is going on in as far as you understand?
Well, my understanding of suicide is that it's the psyche, the human spirit, that is calling for a complete spiritual transformation. And because of the ego reality that we're brought up in, to transform something completely, the belief is that, well, the only way to really do that is to have a death. And of course, the ego then thinks that death has to be a physical death. But most of the religions of the world also teach that in order to become enlightened or become saved or be one with God, there has to be a spiritual death and rebirth. And so I think that if our spiritual leaders on all sides of the world were to start teaching that a spiritual death involves a transforming of spirit, and that's how you acquire that. And if you just kill yourself, then you really don't get there. There is no, I mean, you transform yourself because your body's no longer here, but you do not transform what needs to be transformed. There's no renewal in there.
I think you covered your microphone with some papers. Are you using your computer?
No, I'm using the computer.
Oh, there. Okay, that was suddenly better. So this transformation that some individuals, at least, are seeking, seems to be generated by so much pain.
Yeah, and I think that the transformation is a message from the moral injury, saying you need to transform yourself and all that you've done in order to be at peace, because we're not going to let you be at peace until you do that. So ego hears that, and ego, who hasn't been taught spiritual and natural laws, says, okay, I need to do that. And the way to do that, and to stop this moral injury from causing so much pain, and then the trauma also causing so much pain, the way to do that is to go and end my life as it is. And my take on that, if I hear somebody's having suicidal ideation, my take is, well, that's a really good sign, because that means your psyche, your spirit, is calling for you to change everything. And the way to change everything is to do it here, with me, and to help you have that death and rebirth psychologically and spiritually. And then you can have the rest of your life to do whatever it is that you came to do here in the first place. And so that's very empowering to the person, because of the weirdness of it, it's interesting. And so then they want to know more, because instead of just getting a suicide contract, which usually doesn't work, if somebody's made up their mind, they'll say, yeah, I won't do it. And then they'll go and do it. And so and then of course the dreams are involved in that. And so the psyche has kicked in, and then it'll give them dreams that will help them understand at what level the healing needs to happen. This is where again, most veterans in the VA were not asked about our dreams because most therapists don't know what to do with dreams. But a lot of the veterans, the dreams that they have to do with activities that happen in a war zone or somewhere. And a lot of times it's the disembodied spirits that were people that were killed on whichever side that are coming for resolution. And this is where I talk about the offerings because, a lot of veterans use drugs or alcohol in order to make the dream stop. And my take is, no, we need to make a relationship with whoever is in the dream, whether it's the enemy, whether it's your friend. We need to make a relationship with them so that now you can help them and you can help yourself. And so,
excuse me, it's so clear here. I mean, as you're speaking, that this shift has to occur at within the culture of the military, right? I mean, it's great when people are getting help, if they're having symptoms and so forth, but people are going to continue to have those symptoms if the stigma is eased up, if there's an understanding of what's going on. And that's only going to happen, right? And correct me if I'm wrong here, unless the culture of the military begins to shift. I mean, that just seems like such a profound shift.
Which would be, a beginning. And I think I haven't looked at the chapter, but towards the end, I said, wouldn't it be really great if instead, at your discharge, instead of handing you your DD-214 and showing you the door, and now all of a sudden you're totally and walking on Mars, and you don't know what to do. And so instead of doing that, what if the chaplains and people would have a ceremony where there'd be some of the old warriors there, like in the indigenous cultures, and they would sing songs for you, and they would help you bring back your spirit. There'd be symbolic actions from whatever tradition you believed in, to where gifts would be given and acknowledged, and then say, yeah, we're with you no matter where you go, and help you reintegrate back into the world of a civilian life. And I saw something really moving recently. It was on television. I think it was in Billings, Montana, where a young warrior had just returned from Afghanistan. And at the airport, at the Billings airport, there was the tribal leaders, the tribal spiritual people with drums and with regalia. And as he's coming down the escalator, they start singing these warrior songs.
Wow.
And the whole community that was there at the airport, all people, they just gathered around this warrior. And they touched them, they actually touched them and said, welcome back, welcome home.
Oh my gosh.
Restoring the soul. And stuff like that doesn't cost anything, for us to be able to do that. And to have a protocol that the chaplains could be in charge of, they need stuff to do, to where even as they're leaving the war zone, wherever it is, to start having those prayer ceremonies within the tradition of the warrior, so that they start reintegrating themselves spiritually. And then when they finally get the DD-214 should be the last thing they get, because that's just a piece of paper. And wouldn't that be so amazing? And then if the person does need to go to the VA or whatnot, to continue that ceremony there, where old warriors and therapists and healers would have a circle there where they could walk into and say, this circle is your protection. And as you're dealing with whatever you need to deal with, the circle is there for you. And things that are, the resources are already there. They just need to be tweaked a little bit. And that's one idea that I think would really go a long way. And I know when I got out, I was floundering. I didn't even know what was going on. Mm-hmm. I just thought, I'm out now and I don't get to wear this uniform. And then many years later, it caught up to where, wow, a lot happened that I hadn't even thought about. And through the process of therapy and doing therapy, it's like stuff kept emerging. And that's where the moral injury and the PTSD and stuff finally in the last year or so came together. And I thought, I need to talk about this.
What's your affiliation, if any, now with the VA?
I mean, I'm a patient there because
Okay.
here in Bozeman, they give really good service, by the way. And I tried the civilian health system, and it wasn't that good for me. And also, my own psychotherapy at the VA, I do it on screen because there's not enough therapists at the VA to do that. But luckily, the person that I work with, she has a huge heart. I mean, she doesn't really understand a lot of what I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
but she's present and she cares. And that's where, the healing, the medicine has emerged, and then has emerged from me so that I can pass it on to other people. So, so I'm with the VA, and very recently, because of her advice, I also joined. Never thought I'd do this. I joined the Vietnam Veterans of America, and that was a big step for me, going over and with all these old guys and having breakfast. And I was like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this.
Why?
I don't know. I just couldn't. But my wife insisted. She says, you need to get out and make some friends. And I'm like, no, I don't know about these guys. But it was interesting. The first meeting, they have a chaplain, they do prayer, they stand at attention, all this. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then in Bozeman, get this, they have a replica of the Vietnam Wall. And I didn't know that until recently. And talking with these guys, they're the ones that sponsored it. It's a smaller wall, but all the names are there. And so I went for a walk by myself over to the wall. And that was profoundly excruciatingly healing. To just be there and walk by the wall, and I don't even know how to describe that. That was just a whole other realm. And again, it's through the Vietnam Veterans of America and what they do. And then they help veterans who are sick, in the hospital. They go visit. So it's a good crew. And I just, for some reason, resisted all this time. And kind of remind me, this elder, I was at a conference, and he went up there, and he was like a World War II veteran. And he says, I used to be a veteran. And I thought, no, man, you don't get to, that doesn't go away. But that's gone, man. I used to be one. So, yeah.
Wow. Ed, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, soulhealing16.com. And that's I have a website. Somebody made it for me. And I have resources on there. I have papers and, connection to the books. And so, and I have a talk on there and like that.
Okay. Soulhealing16.com. I'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Again, with all of your books. Ed, talking to you, I feel closer, feel grounding and grounded. And I love the fact that there's someone out there like you doing this work. It reminds me of why I'm doing this podcast, and I get to speak with amazing people like you. So thank you so much for coming back on here.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Guy. I mean, you're getting the word out there, and I'm just a small piece of it. And I see you got hundreds of people on the podcast. And so thank you so much. I mean, I honor everything you do in regards to your brother, whom you mentioned in the past as a veteran, and like that. Okay.
I appreciate that. All right. Take care.
All right. Yeah. Blessings.
Several years ago when I was in graduate school and just starting seeing clients, I was doing a lot of commuting, like an hour and a half each way to my site. I was always thinking about my clients. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Why didn't I do that? Why I should have done that? And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be awesome if I had a seasoned master trauma therapist sitting right there beside me in the passenger seat? Well, obviously that didn't happen. So I created the program, and it's Trauma Therapist 2.0. It's my online community specifically dedicated for new trauma workers. If that's you, if you're just starting out on this trauma-informed journey, if you're passionate about this work and you're looking to gain confidence, you're looking to share your journey, share your challenges and share your wins, to get inspiration, also to help to inspire others, I want to invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0. by going to traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist, the number 2.com.